What a wild night in America last night, overnight hours into this morning and today. And you know what I'm talking about, election 2020. The presidential election is now, votes are still being counted. Things are being contested. And whenever you have sides that are battling it out, you know what happens next. We end up in a courtroom. And of course, your front row seat to justice is ready to take it from there. So right now, what we understand is that the president's campaign, President Trump's campaign, has filed a couple of lawsuits. So let's bring in Court TV special contributor Ashley Banfield, Court TV anchor Michael Ayala. This is breaking news tonight. Michael, I'll start with you. What can you tell us? What is going on?
Yeah, Vinny, as we predicted yesterday, if this came down to the wire and just a few votes separated these candidates, there were going to be lots of lawsuits, and in fact, that happened. We're getting word into the newsroom just a few minutes ago that a lawsuit was filed in Georgia, where we're located, and that suit basically claims that they were accepting ballots after the 7 p.m. deadline for Georgia. So they want to get that checked into. Earlier today, there were lawsuits filed in Wisconsin. There were lawsuits filed in Michigan and also in Pennsylvania. And in Wisconsin, it was actually not a lawsuit, but they're demanding a recount, claiming that because it was so close, election law in Wisconsin allows elections that are within 1%. Either of the candidates can demand a recount, so they're demanding a recount there. They want recounts also in Michigan and Pennsylvania, but the reason for that there is they're claiming that they're observers, folks who go in and observe to make sure that this count is going according to plan and things are all perfectly done well. They're claiming that they weren't given access to these counts that were going on. And so they want to stop the count. They want to get a recount done there, and they have a lawsuit seeking to get some of those votes thrown out if they find improprieties. Now, the Trump administration did hold a press conference earlier today, led by Rudy Giuliani. Of course, he is the lawyer for the Trump campaign, one of the lead lawyers, and also an advisor to the Trump campaign. So let's hear what he had to say about these lawsuits.
This election gets decided by the people. These people, the elite, they don't care about the people. The people are the deplorables, the chumps. They're not important. To President Trump, he's the whole reason that he ran for office. And he's the whole reason for which he's carrying on this campaign, so that your vote can mean something.
Now, the Trump campaign also said that they're going to be getting involved in the case we talked about yesterday, the one involving that 3-day extension for accepting ballots that come in by mail in Pennsylvania. So it's clear that the Trump campaign is laying the groundwork to really get this whole election decided in the courts of the United States of America.
Ashley Banfield, let me ask you, are you surprised tonight?
Nope. No. And so many reasons. But what I am a little surprised at, Vinny, is the caliber of some of the lawsuits that I'm seeing. One in particular has to do with 53 ballots, I think. And if I'm not mistaken, and Michael, you stop me anytime if I am, this one's in Georgia, where the vote difference is 45,000. So I'm not exactly 100% sure what ground that will gain the Trump campaign if they can litigate 53 ballots, like, okay, but that's not going to do much with regard to moving the needle. The issues regarding the Pennsylvania vote, I get that. That's a constitutional issue. I think the Supreme Court will be looking in on that, and they will assess what the Pennsylvania Supreme Court decided, because that can actually have some actual merit, right? So if the Pennsylvania Supreme Court wanted to accommodate for COVID and make, voting better and allow 3 more days for counting, well, the U.S. Constitution maybe doesn't necessarily say that courts can do that. They say that legislatures can do that. So I get that issue, and I understand why that would be litigated. But this other stuff seems to be pretty cherry picky, and I'm really wondering where are the lawsuits in Nevada and Arizona. It doesn't look like the Trump campaign wants to stop any of the counting in Nevada and Arizona because it's going well. They just want to stop it where Trump is already leading. So freeze it in place where Trump's leading, but where Biden is leading, keep that count going because that could flip. To me, that sounds petty and political.
Well, yeah. Well, I think every lawsuit associated with every election will have that. But let's get back to that Pennsylvania one, Michael. Does that have the potential to perhaps down the road be like this year's version of Bush v. Gore?
I don't think it does, and I'll tell you why. Bush v. Gore involved some time constraints there. It involved a recount. They were coming up against some deadlines, and so that became a big issue. Here, the states have their own deadlines for counting their votes. Then they have until December 8th to actually get a certified count to the House, which then continues the process. So I don't think we're going to see that. As far as these cases involving the observance irregularities and the one Ashley talked about, a lot of the election law experts I spoke to today say they don't see those having legs. There's not a lot of precedent for them. They said a lot of these complaints came up in the 11th hour, that there haven't been complaints throughout the process. Even the governor of Pennsylvania came and did a press conference saying everything's going great, legal, and we're going to count everybody's vote according to the law. So they don't think that will have legs, but Ashley was right again in terms of pointing out that case that we talked about yesterday, the one involving the extension, the one involving the fact that it was a state court and not the state legislature that actually extended and gave that 3-day extension. But I did speak with an election expert, and his name is Stephen Hefner. He is a professor of law at Ohio State University, their elections law program. And he said because they weren't able to get a stay and the voters were able to rely on that extension, it may change the way the court looks at that case because they can't turn back the clock. Let's take a listen.
There is yet another procedural question now, which is this. Given that the U.S. Supreme Court had an opportunity to stay the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court's decision and failed to do so, have Pennsylvania voters relied upon the existing state law as of yesterday, as of today, which as of now permits these ballots to come in through Friday in a way that requires essentially the federal courts to not disrupt that state of play? And there is a fair amount of precedent for a more general notion that federal courts should leave state election processes alone in the days immediately prior to and after an election. It is too disruptive to the reliance interests that the voters of the state have.
So while the conservative wing of the court saw some problems with it and thought there might be a constitutional violation, it may no longer be a case they can look at that way. It may not be ripe. It may not be a controversy that they want to rule on at this time.
Yeah, and that's the other part of it, right? The other part, Ashley, is based upon how all these other states go. If it turns out that Pennsylvania is, to use a legal term, moot, and it wouldn't matter one way or the other, I could see the Supreme Court, they love to punt.
Yeah. Well, and as we look at the tallies continuing to come in, it's entirely possible at this point that Pennsylvania is not going to matter one iota, not Ayala, but one iota. I do want to just hit on real quick what Michael was saying about the recount in Wisconsin. I was watching an elections official, it was a Secretary of State in Wisconsin earlier today, talking about how recounts, first of all, that Wisconsin is razor thin. So if you win by 2%, it's a landslide in Wisconsin. But that also a recount is paid for by the state if you're within 2 percentage points and paid for by the candidate if you're within 1 percentage point. It actually seemed to me that would be mistaken. I don't know if the person misspoke because it seems like the closer it gets, the more legitimate it would be for the state to help you out. But anyway, the way that the elections officials spoke, it looked like Donald Trump, if he wants to launch a recount in Wisconsin, would have to pay for it because it's within 1 percentage point, the margin. But then the more interesting information that elections official had, Vinny, was that when you do recounts in Wisconsin, it moves the needle sometimes between 100 votes and like 400 votes. That's not going to change anything in Wisconsin. So I find it a little weird to take that kind of action in Wisconsin saying recount, because they're tens of thousands of votes apart. So you want to move the needle up the maximum 400, go for it. You've just spent a whole bunch of money and nothing's going to change.
Yeah, I don't know how it's, because I've covered local elections, and because they're much more common, these discrepancies, because the numbers and the margins are much smaller, and a lot of times stuff turns. But you're talking about a dozen votes here for council, or for mayor or something like that. These numbers.
Yeah, but think about 538, right? 538 in Florida. That was one of those federal elections we all covered. Was like, are you kidding me?
Yeah,
The
that was
presidential
insane.
election was decided on 538 vote margin. So, but even that's a crazy margin. But we're talking about maximum 400 votes could change with a recount in Wisconsin, and yet I think Michael was right. He said a lot of this is like puffery, right? The Democrats already said that many of the 300 lawsuits that have been launched in this, election so far was to just sort of sow discontent and cloud things,
Oh,
as
both
opposed to
sides were
have actual
filing
merit.
lawsuits.
Vinny, I just want
True.
to jump in real quick, and Ashley's exactly right. What I was going to say, a lot of the elections experts were telling me that they think this is part of a larger plan to just sow these seeds of discontent. The fact that they want to make the overall process seem illegitimate in some way, and that can continue Donald Trump with his power.
Yeah, kind of like what happened 4 years ago. The other side made that presidency look illegitimate for 4 years. So it's all politics. It all comes out of politics. But when they get in the courtroom, the good thing is there's actual rules, and there's procedures, and there's an end to it. Evidence,
right?
And ultimately,
Evidence, yes.
hopefully, an opinion. And speaking of opinions, if something does go to the Supreme Court now, Michael, it won't be 4-4 anymore.
No, there's gonna, we're talking about, we all know who, Amy Coney Barrett, what effect she might have on this situation. And I think we have to go no further than that Pennsylvania case where we saw the four conservative justices ruling one way, which was they wanted to put a stay and not allow the 3-day extension in Pennsylvania. And then 3 liberal judges plus Chief Justice Roberts ruling that they thought the extension should be allowed to go forward. Now, change the makeup of the court and add Amy Coney Barrett onto that side with Thomas, Alito, Kavanaugh, and Gorsuch. Now you have 5 conservatives in a very solid wing. You have Justice Roberts there in the middle. Where does he go? Does he go with the liberals? It's not going to make a difference anymore. His swing vote is not important. He may have voted with the liberals in that case in Pennsylvania because he thought it was the right outcome. But no longer will he have that power. His swing vote won't matter because they have a solid 5-member conservative bunch. And it's fair to assume, based on her jurisprudence, that that's where Amy Coney Barrett will land. So if this case gets decided by the court, if they decide to look at this case again, she could firmly sit in that conservative majority and make a big, big difference. I think this is what the Trump administration had in mind, right? The entire Republican Party had in mind when they wanted to make sure that Amy Coney Barrett was on the bench before this election took place.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it was a big part of the first campaign of the president was about the Supreme Court. I mean, he put out, as part of his campaign, the people that he, was on his list that he wanted to put on there. Ashley, let's talk about, a lot of this is the changes that were made in the way the votes were done in a lot of states. And there were changes, there were some lawsuits filed to get the changes done in some states, but it all has to do with the mail, right? Mail-in ballots. Like absentee ballots have been around for a long time. But here, there's absentee, and then all of a sudden it became almost the presumption, and almost exclusively in some states, that they were doing mail-in. And I know this is an issue we're going to tackle at the top of the next hour, but your thoughts about how it's impacting everything that's going on now.
Sure, just real quick, because we'll go into more depth about this, because I think this is something that a lot of people are wondering. Why do I keep hearing about mail-in ballots and then I hear about absentee ballots? Are they the same thing? And why are they complaining and suing over mail-in ballots? Let's be really clear. I'm going to take you back before the Civil War in this country, where there was absentee ballot voting. So it ain't new. It's been going on for a long time. All absentee ballots go through the mail. Some of them actually get faxed. Go figure. But more than 75% of the country right now has access to mail-in balloting. And the difference between absentee balloting and mail-in balloting is oftentimes what the state will do, whether they'll just automatically send you a ballot, as opposed to I need to call and request one and have a reason for voting. That's an absentee ballot. But no matter what, it ain't new. It's been done a lot, and it's really not problematic. I'm also going to go over the actual stats from a conservative think tank on voter fraud and how many times things have gone awry. I think Donald Trump and his campaign will probably like hearing about that because it's always interesting to hear about the stuff that doesn't go right, especially when you're launching lawsuits. So you might be surprised at what the conservative think tank actually says. But we're going to go over all of that, and we're going to go over the history of mail-in and absentee balloting and how often people have actually put their ballots in the mail and sent them in, and they got counted.
All right, Ashley, we'll see you at the top of the hour. Michael Ayala, thanks for keeping us on top of this, and I know things will develop, and we'll hear from you again, if not tonight, tomorrow night.